Welcome back to the Property Punch podcast. I'm Tabo, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, my dad, and property mentor, Washington.
I'm Washington from your Wealth Mentor. And what we do here is we help Australians to build wealth through property. Not just buying property, but also understanding the strategy behind it.
In today's episode, we're going to be going through and talking about one of the most crucial and yet overlooked steps in the property investing space. Before we even look at locations or houses, you first need to look at how much you can actually borrow to buy an investment property. Or in more simple terms, what is your borrowing capacity?
Honestly, borrowing capacity is one of the largest areas where most people get stuck. Not because it's complicated, but because no one really explains it clearly. So let me ask you something. Have you ever thought, so I earn good money, and so I should be able to borrow more from the bank? Because I hear this all the time. And then someone goes to the bank, or they talk to a mortgage broker, and they're told that they can't borrow as high as they thought. And as a result, they are left confused.
Yes, and that is exactly what we want to clear up in today's episode. We want to break this down properly in a way that actually makes sense.
Because once you understand how borrowing really works, everything changes on how you approach property investing.
So let's start here, because I think this is where most people get it wrong. A lot of people assume borrowing is simple.
Yes, and it actually feels simple on the surface. People often think, I earn X amount of money every year and I should be able to borrow Y. And to be honest, in everyday logic, that works. But unfortunately, that's not exactly how it works. And the reason is because banks just don't look at how much you earn. They actually assess your entire financial situation.
So it's more than just your salary.
That's right, it's way, way more than that. Banks are actually asking themselves, if we lend this person this amount of money, are they able to repay that money over a prolonged period of time? Not just today, but let's say over 20 or 30 years. In other words, banks are asking, how risky are you?
That's a completely different but also kind of understandable way to look at things.
That's absolutely right. And for most people, that's when they realize that their expectation is not exactly what their borrowing capacity is.
So that's what a borrowing capacity is in theory. But I feel like it's also important to talk through the myths because this is where most people get frustrated. Because on paper, they do look like stronger borrowers.
I like the way you say it on paper because that's what we often see. We see this all the time. I see people earning, 120, 150,000 or even more. And in their mind, they think they're in a great position. But when we break it down, we realize that, there are credit cards, there are car loans, and some massive lifestyle spending. And suddenly their borrowing capacity drops.
So credit cards, car loans, and lifestyle spending chip away at someone's borrowing capacity.
It actually does. But usually, it's not one big thing. It's a collection of small little habits combined together. And to be honest, there's also a flip side as well.
And let me guess, the flip side is when you've got someone earning less.
Certainly. One of my favorite sayings is I like to believe that it's not how much you earn, but it's what you do with it. So you're right. You could be seeing someone earning much, much less, but with financial discipline and awareness of what they're buying, their borrowing capacity could be bigger than someone who is earning way, way more than that. So this means no unnecessary debt, controlled spending, and generally a clean setup.
And someone with all of that can actually borrow more.
In many cases, yes, they can. So same system, but completely different outcome.
Those are the myths that often lead to people feeling really frustrated about their situation. But let's think in the minds of banks. What's the core question banks are asking?
So it all comes down to banks asking this question. Can this person comfortably afford to pay this loan over a long term? And the key word here is comfortably, which is quite important.
And what does comfortably in the minds of a bank actually mean and look like?
It simply means after paying all your expenses and debt, you still have room to handle things like interest rate increases, unexpected costs, and changes to your income as well. So in other words, they are looking for stability and resilience.
So in a sense, banks are actually stress testing you.
That's exactly right. And we're going to look into that in more detail.
So we've looked at the myths and we've looked at how banks really think, but let's look at the 5 factors that actually matter when it comes to someone's borrowing capacity. Let's break down the first factor, income.
You know what? Income matters, but unfortunately, not all income is treated equally. So your base income before tax is generally taken to be 100%. But things like overtime, bonuses, and rental income can be treated differently.
So you're saying that they don't count at all?
No, they count, but they are not counted as 100%. Usually they're counted as, say, 70 to 80% of the assessment.
And why do banks do that?
Because they understand that those other types of incomes are not guaranteed. In other words, they're being conservative to protect against fluctuations.
Well, this one feels big, and it's our number 2 factor, expenses.
It is. And this is where most people get caught. They lose their borrowing capacity without realizing it. When banks are assessing you, they look at either your actual spending or they apply a benchmark. And between the two, they use whichever is higher.
So if you spend more, that actually starts to work against you.
That's correct. In other words, your lifestyle becomes your baseline. So if you're consistently spending on things like, dining out, subscriptions, or shopping, etc., that reduces how much surplus income you have. And as a result, this drops your borrowing capacity. It's as simple as that.
We're up to factor number 3, and that is debt, especially those credit cards.
This one is a big one that most people misunderstand. Even if you don't use your credit card, banks still assess it based on the credit card limit.
So someone's $10,000 credit card limit still counts?
Yes, it will, because banks assume that you could use it at any time. So they factor in a repayment against it. In actual fact, a 10,000 credit card limit reduces your borrowing capacity by $70,000 on average. And that's quite huge.
That really is huge.
It is. And the same applies to car loans, personal loans, HEX debt. They all reduce your borrowing capacity.
Interest rate buffer is number 4, and this one surprises people.
Yes, it does, because banks don't assess you at today's rates. So for example, if today's interest rates are 6%, they will assess you at 9%. They put a 3% buffer in case interest rates increases. So you want to make sure that you can still afford the loan at the higher rate.
That's quite a big difference. But I guess banks are just trying to cover themselves.
They are, but it's all about future proofing. They want to make sure that you can still afford to pay the loan if interest rates rise.
Last but not least on our 5-factor list is structure.
So structure is when strategy comes in. Most people focus on getting approved, but not how that loan will set them up for purchase of the next property. In other words, the way you set up this current loan will be very important when you now want to get back to the market to purchase your next investment or your next property.
So your initial setup and thus structure has a major impact on future investments.
Correct. The way you structure your loans can either help you grow or limit you completely. And this is where having the right guidance through the right mentorship makes a massive difference.
This is one of my favorite segments in every single episode because this is where we take our theory and what we've learned into real tactile experiences, experienced by real clients. So Dad, let's make this real.
So I'll give an example of two individuals making the same amount of income, let's say $100,000 a year. Client A has got a car loan, a couple of credit cards, and spending is a bit loose. They spend, dining out, buying shoes every day or buying shoes every week, going on holiday, etc., etc. Client B has got no consumer debt. They control their expenses they've got a budget and they're able to know exactly how to allocate expenses every week, and they've got a clean setup. So which client do you think is able to borrow more, A or B?
Well, if I was listening, and I'm pretty sure I was listening pretty well, I think I would say client B or the second client.
Yes, correct.
I don't know why you're looking at me like I got it wrong.
Correct. Because what they have done is they have created more financial capacity. And that's the key. Borrowing capacity is something that you build over time.
So with using that knowledge we just gained from those real life examples, let's say someone at home wants to think strategy. What can people actually do?
Good thing you ask. So there are 4 things that are within your control. Number 1, reduce unnecessary debt. So this will be like starting simple. Reduce credit cards and personal loans because these things quietly reduce your borrowing capacity. 2, be aware of your spending. In other words, be intentional with where you're spending your money on. So you don't need to be extreme here. You don't need to starve yourself, but just awareness goes a long way. 3, structure matters. So this is where most investors go wrong. They focus on just buying the next property, but forgetting how this will set them for the next purchase. And 4, making sure that you're working with the right people, with the right team. So for example, not all mortgage brokers are equal, and not all lenders assess your financials the same way. And this can literally change your borrowing outcome.
So strategy is mainly about having that mindset shift.
Yes, it is. And to be honest, improving your borrowing capacity is not a one-time thing. It's actually something that evolves. Every decision you make either strengthens or weakens your borrowing capacity. And that's why some people stop at one property or one investment property, whilst others keep growing.
Now, even though I'm an optimist, it is important to be realistic. And I think in every episode, well, most of the ones we've done recently, we've gone through the common mistakes that people can often encounter or do themselves, because even though we like to think of ourselves as maybe perfect, mistakes do and can happen. And some are preventable and can have huge benefits if they are prevented early on. So let's run through these mistakes.
Look, let me run pursue a lot of mistakes that I've seen all the time, some of which I've personally made myself. Taking on car loan too early and keeping multiple credit cards. I've made those two mistakes in the past, not realizing how much crippling it is on borrowing capacity. Not reviewing structure, and this is where most people require close guidance. Thinking that one bank is your only option. In other words, being loyal to one bank. Not a good option at all, because that bank will not be loyal to you either. So these mistakes all seem small, but they all add up.
I can't believe it's that time already. We've gone through so much today. We've gone through what is borrowing capacity. We've got into the minds of banks when it comes to looking at someone's borrowing capacity.
Yep.
We've gone through real life examples and common mistakes. But now it's time for some key takeaways for the viewers at home. So what are some of the key takeaways?
So some key takeaways. Borrowing capacity isn't just about income. It's about behavior, structure, and strategy. So before we finish, I've got a question for you. Now that you understand, intimately what you fully understand what borrowing capacity is and how it works, how do you think your borrowing capacity is going at the moment? Are you, and I'm sure, I heard you saying you want to buy your property as soon as you finish studies and you get your first paycheck.
My borrowing capacity is fantastic right now.
It's fantastic.
No credit cards. I do have one debt, but that's a debt everyone has around my age, that HEX. They send me the invoice every semester that I don't really look at, but I have that one.
Yeah.
And even though my income is small, like you said, because my spending's so clean, it's fantastic.
Okay. Look, one thing that Mom and I we've been discussing lately is to help you to secure a loan to buy your first property by providing a guarantor loan. Do you know what a guarantor loan is?
I think we've actually spoken about it in the previous episode.
Yeah, we have. But refresh my memory if you still understand what it is.
I don't understand what it is, but I think I remember the premise, which was using your family's home equity to help with the loan, and something about helping to bypass the lender's mortgage insurance, something along those lines.
Close, you're very close. So I'll tell you what a guarantor on a loan is going to be. This is where mom and dad legally agree to be responsible for repaying your debt on your first property if you cannot make repayments to the bank. Okay, that's how the guarantor loan is going to be. And we're going to do this through providing security through our home equity so that you can secure your loan on your first property. And this is going to help you to avoid lender's mortgage insurance, which is tens of thousands of dollars, because you'll be borrowing less than 80% of the property price. And because you probably won't be having a lot of money for a deposit anyway. So we're going to use our equity to put down as a guarantor loan just to protect you, to make sure that you get into the property market as quick as possible. This is a strategy which most of our clients are using to help their young children to get into the property market early, rather than you spending years and years of saving. How about you just get in there through a guarantor loan, and then mom and dad help you out. And as your property grows in value, it can be refinanced where you've got enough equity, and then we can get off to be guarantor loans after a few years' time.
Well, that's fantastic, and I can't wait for that to happen.
So, but keep saving, because it's on the premise that your saving habits are intact.
Right.
Yeah, so in other words, we are your internal bank.
Let's hope you guys are nice and internal bank.
Yeah, and make sure you're still on good behavior as well, on your best behavior. That's one of the conditions.
Your reflection this week is simple. Do you actually understand your borrowing capacity, or are you just assuming based on your income?
Because your borrowing capacity isn't defined by how much you earn. It is defined by how you structure, manage, and plan your finances. And small changes today can significantly impact how much you can borrow tomorrow.
That's episode 18 of the Property Punch podcast.
Subscribe, share it with someone who's thinking about investing, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Sip smart, invest better.